So I've been steadily updating the VTool templates, and I've added an example buffer rigs um, into the VTool templates. This one requires you to have the latest release of VTool uh, 05.797. Um, there was a bunch of stuff here like rig set buffer has fixes and delete setup needed some fixing for the example to work properly. So that's you need those two dependencies, and then you can play around with it. So um, I'm starting to add an examples process here, and I'm going to add little processes that show different features in Vetala. The first one is buffer rigs, and this shows how to layer three different rig setups on top of each other. So if I process this, it does FK, IK, and then an FK curve rig, and then it hooks it all up to this little gear. So if I do one, that's my IK setup, and if I do two, that's my curve setup. And I should be able to pose each one, so I could select a bunch of FK controls, rotate it, and then switch to one, and maybe close that, and then I can switch to two, close this, and you'll see that has I switch between them. Wait, as I switch between them, it'll hit each pose. The controls only become visible when you set it to the full value. So one, then the control is visible. Two, then the controls are visible. This allows you to be able to see the joint chain as it changes between controllers. But okay, so the way this is working is on this joint chain, as long as I feed it always the same joints to each rig setup, it adds this buffer, these buffer inputs, and each one of these inputs corresponds to a different rig. So this is the FK rig input, this is the IK, and this is the FK curve input, and it's on the parent constraint and the scale constraint. The way that this is working is that in FK rig, you set buffer to true, and it will create a duplicate chain, do all the rigging on the duplicate chain, and then feed that in, Lego piece that into the main joint chain. And same for here on IK rig, it's going to create a duplicate chain because I set buffer to true, and then it will Lego piece that duplicate chain into the main chain. And same for FK curve rig. So what if I go here and I do something like set this to false? So what it'll mean is FK rig is going to get a buffer, IK rig is not going to get a buffer, and FK curve rig is still going to get a buffer. So if I run this, so you can see that the joint chain has turned brown, and this is because it's added IK's handle to the main joints here. So if I graph this, I have my IK handle over here somewhere. There it is. So there's my IK handle, and it's applied directly to the joint chain, the main joint chain here. And so that's a problem. If I go and I check my joints, you can see that there's only two buffers. This is basically the FK buffer and the FK curve buffer. But there's no long, well, actually here there's a buffer, but it's CNT IK top, so it's constraining the actual top IK control into that setup. So, and if I start moving this around, you can see it's not very nice. And even my pull vector stopped working. So this is what the buffer setups are trying to avoid, is applying the rig to the actual joint chain. It always applies it to the buffer joint chain and then Lego pieces it in. One cool thing about Vetala now is if I show last log, you'll get information about what went wrong. So in this case, it says set buffer false on a rig that has used buffer joints in the past. So in the past, FK rig set buffer to true, so it has buffer joints, but then IK set buffer to false, it doesn't have any buffer joints. So here it says consider turning on set buffer true for the IK rig. And then set buffer false on joints that are already constrained. So again, it's just saying these joints have been constrained and you set buffer to false, so it's kind of undefined behavior. Basically, if they're constrained and you set buffer, it's going to feed in your buffer joints into the constraint. But if it's false, then it's feeding the complete like IK setup into the joints, and then it doesn't behave as nicely. So better feedback for buffer. If you do rig.set buffer, you'll get a lot of extra stuff in here. I'll do a video eventually about this, but for right now, it can be disregarded. It's from an old setup that I was doing, and I tested it, and it might need some polish. But for now, if you just do set buffer true, you can access that buffer being created. And then at the very end here, you can see that it at the start here, it creates the settings and it adds the attribute. And then at the very end, it connects the switch. So if I go here to this, let me build it again, but properly. I think, yeah, so IK rig has buffer set to true again. And so if I go to here, I have my switch attribute that was created. Now this is ending up getting connected to put.joints 0. So in the first setup, I get the joints and then I store it. And then each of the rigs is using put to get those joints back. And then at the very end, it's using put to get the first joint. So the first joint here has a switch attribute. You can see it here. So when you use buffer rigs, the joint chains will get switch attributes automatically. And this switch attribute handles the switching between these different constraint weights. It also handles hiding and showing the controllers as it switches. So all I had to do here is take my settings and switch attribute and then feed it in to this switch attribute, and I got all the functionality, all this visibility stuff happening automatically. You can customize when controllers turn off and on. So if I go into the ground, I can look at FK rig. There's a condition joint switch. You could change these. You could edit this condition so that it would be something other than 0. Like you could say less than 0.9. And so then it will, from 0 to 0.9, it will be on. So if I switch this to 0.9, if I switch it to 0.8, it'll be on. And it just stays on longer now as it's switching, and then it will switch to the. You're going to have some issue with the IK. Yeah, already I'm having issue with the IK. It's not showing. Oh, there it is. And so if I go to the IK, maybe I need to get a better setup for this, but yeah, you'd have to have 2 nodes or something in order for this to be on longer. So that these conditions are where it's controlling the visibility. This may change in the future to be something more flexible. All right, so thanks for watching. This shows the buffer setups, and hopefully I'll continue to add more examples into the templates to continue to demystify parts of Vetala.